You check the tire pressure light on your dashboard for the third week in a row and decide, again, that it can wait until Saturday. It is a small orange icon, the kind of thing that costs $11.04 to fix, and you have simply not gotten around to it. You drive to the bank with the light on. You walk in wearing a jacket you bought 6 years ago, the zipper pull replaced with a paperclip because the original one snapped off in a way that felt too minor to mention to anyone, and too small a repair to justify a new jacket. Inside, a banker slides a printout across the desk. Somewhere in the middle of that printout, in a font no larger than anything else on the page, sits a number with 9 digits in front of the decimal. She doesn't circle it, she doesn't say anything about it at all. It is simply one line among many, sandwiched between a checking balance and a line of small print about FDIC coverage. She's more interested, it seems, in confirming your mailing address hasn't changed, which it hasn't, not once in 14 years. Nothing in the room changes. The banker doesn't blink. The man in line behind you is arguing quietly with a teller about an overdraft fee, the kind of argument that will still be happening in some version at every bank in the country tomorrow. You don't blink either. You say thank you, fold the paper once, put it in your jacket pocket next to a grocery list, and drive home with the tire light still on. The levels don't feel like levels when you're inside them. Everything eventually just becomes Tuesday. Your neighbor Trevor got a new truck in April. It arrived on a flatbed, gleaming dealer plate still zip-tied to the bumper, and by the time it hit the driveway, he had already posted 4 photos of it. One from the front, one of the dashboard lit up like a cockpit, one of his own boot resting on the running board like Head personally forged the thing out of raw ore. Trevor financed the truck over 72 months. He tells you this without you asking, standing in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon, running his hand along the hood, the way people touch things they're still deciding whether they trust. He mentions the payment is basically nothing, which is a sentence people only say about payments that are in fact something. It is $980 a month. He says it the way other people mention the weather. The truck costs $71,000 out the door, with the extended cab and the towing package hell almost certainly never used for towing anything. At his post-tax wage, that isn't dollars. It's roughly 2,400 hours of his life, 9.5 months of every waking hour he has, already spent before the truck has driven its first mile to Home Depot for 2 bags of mulch. He calls it an investment. It is not an investment. It loses 11% of its value the moment it leaves the lot, and it keeps losing more every month. He's still paying interest on a thing that is, mechanically speaking, worth less than it was yesterday. This is habit 1, and it isn't really a habit so much as the absence of one. The rich looking buy the symbol, and the quietly rich buy the asset underneath the symbol, if they buy anything at all. Trevor bought the truck because he wanted the driveway to say something about him before he opened his mouth. He wanted the neighbors, the guys at the gym, the girl had been talking to online, to arrive at a conclusion about him without having to do the work of proving it. You have never once needed your driveway to talk. Your car is 8 years old and starts every single morning without complaint, and the only thing it announces to anyone is that you haven't gotten around to washing it. Later that week, you watch him post a photo of the truck at sunset, captioned with a single word, blessed, and 41 people like it before you close the app. Nobody in those 41 likes knows what the interest rate is. Nobody ever does. That's the entire mechanism. The performance only works because the audience never sees the balance sheet, only the truck. You think about Kevin too from 2 jobs ago, who leased instead of financed, which he considered the smarter move, the more sophisticated one. He'd explain it at lunch with the confidence of someone reciting a fact he'd read once, and never checked. You're always driving something new, you're never upside down, you just hand it back in 3 years and start over. What he never mentioned, maybe never fully worked out for himself, is that handing it back in 3 years and starting over is precisely the problem, not the feature. He was never 3 years from owning anything. He was 3 years from doing it again on a slightly higher payment forever, with nothing at the end of any of it except the next lease. 12 years after you met him, you'd guess he's paid something close to $95,000 in lease payments and owns, at this exact moment, 0 cars. Neither Trevor nor Kevin is a bad person. That's worth saying plainly, because it would be easy for this to sound like contempt, and it isn't. They're both doing something almost everyone is taught to do without ever being told they're doing it. Solving a status problem with a financial instrument, and mistaking the relief of the purchase for the arrival of the thing the purchase was supposed to prove. Habit 2 happens on a Sunday morning nobody will ever hear about, let alone photograph. You sit at the kitchen table with coffee going lukewarm beside a laptop, and you go through every recurring charge on every account, one line at a time. Most months this takes 11 minutes. This month, it takes 18 because you find a $14.99 charge from an app you downloaded during a layover in Denver 2 years ago and never opened again. You cancel it. Nobody claps. Nobody was ever going to. The 18 minutes buys you $179.88 a year forever, for as long as you remember to keep checking. Which, because of habit 2, is forever. Habit 3 sits right next to it, quieter still. You never check your balance out of anxiety. You check it out of maintenance, the same way you check the oil in a car you intend to keep running for another decade. There's a difference between looking at your money because you're afraid of what it's going to tell you and looking at your money because you're the one in charge of it. The rich looking check compulsively, refreshing an app at midnight, hoping the number rescues them from a decision they already made earlier that day. You check on a schedule, the second Sunday of the month, coffee, laptop, 18 minutes, because the system runs whether you watch it or not. That's the whole point of building it that way in the first place. Underneath both habits is something simpler that took years to become automatic. A fixed percentage moves out of every paycheck before you ever see it, into an account you've made just inconvenient enough to reach that you never touch it by accident. You don't decide to save each month. You decided once, years ago, and the decision has been quietly voting on your behalf ever since, whether you're paying attention or not. The willpower only had to show up one time. After that, the system does the remembering. The growth happens here in the flat grey middle where nothing is cinematic and nobody is watching. Not in a single dramatic month, not in a lucky trade, not in a truck arriving on a flatbed. Boring was never the obstacle. Boring is the qualification. There is a version of this Sunday morning that's happened maybe 400 times now. Roughly the same coffee, roughly the same 18 minutes, roughly the same quiet satisfaction of finding one wasted subscription and killing it. 400 Sundays don't look like anything from the outside. From the inside, they're the entire architecture. Your brother-in-law came over once on one of these mornings, saw the spreadsheet open on the laptop, and asked, half joking, if you were still doing that. He meant it kindly, the way people mean things when they've quietly decided a habit looks a little sad from the outside. A grown adult tracking $14.99 charges on a Sunday instead of doing something that looks more like living. You didn't defend it. There isn't really a defense that fits inside a casual kitchen conversation. The 18 minutes aren't a sacrifice. They stopped being a sacrifice years ago, somewhere around the 200th Sunday, when the checking became less of a task and more of a habit indistinguishable from brushing your teeth, something you'd feel strange skipping, not something you have to talk yourself into. What he doesn't see, standing in your kitchen with his own coffee, is that the spreadsheet isn't really about the $14.99. It's about never again being the last person in the room to notice something has gone quietly wrong. The subscription is a small, harmless version of a bigger discipline. The same discipline that would catch a bank error, a fraudulent charge, a fee that crept in during a policy change nobody announced. Small vigilance, practiced weekly, is what keeps a much larger emergency from ever having the chance to become one. He asks if he can see the spreadsheet. You show him, he nods, says it's impressive, and never brings it up again. The email goes out company-wide at 9:14 on a Thursday morning. Subject line: Organizational update. Everyone with a badge to that building reads it within 4 minutes, because everyone recognizes, instantly, the specific bloodless tone corporate language takes right before it ruins someone's year. Trevor is in that email. So is half the floor. The layoffs aren't personal. They're a spreadsheet decision made 3 states away by people who will never meet the 81 names on the list. But personal or not, the effect lands exactly the same on the person holding the phone. Trevor calls you that evening. His voice has a different texture to it, thinner, like something underneath has gone hollow and the sound is just barely making it across the gap. He has a truck payment, a lease on an apartment he can't easily break without a penalty, and a credit card balance head been meaning to get serious about for over a year. The severance covers 10 weeks. His expenses don't stretch anywhere close to that far, and everyone at that dinner table already knows it, including him, before he says it out loud. You listen. You don't say the thing you're thinking, which is that his life was quietly built for the version of the story where nothing ever goes wrong. The truck payment sized to the paycheck he had in April, the lease signed on the assumption of a bonus that hadn't been guaranteed by anyone, the credit card treated like a bridge instead of what it actually is, which is a very expensive short-term loan with a due date attached. Same storm, different boats. Habit 4 is the one that made the difference that night. And it isn't dramatic in the slightest. You have always kept somewhere between 6 months and a year of ordinary expenses sitting in something boring and liquid. Not invested, not growing, not doing anything interesting at all, existing purely so that a Thursday like this one costs you a night of poor sleep and nothing more structural than that. You built it years before you had a single reason to believe you need it. Back when it felt almost pointless to let that much money sit somewhere earning next to nothing. It felt pointless right up until 9:14 on a Thursday morning, at which point it stopped feeling pointless and started feeling like the only decision in the last decade that mattered more than any other single one. The surprise has a comma in it, but a system was already standing there waiting, built years before the blow had a reason to exist. You don't tell Trevor about it. There's no version of that phone call where volunteering your own cushion helps him build his. Over the following weeks you watch, from a slight distance, what happens when the cushion doesn't exist. Trevor sells the truck at a loss within a month, $11,000 underwater once the payoff and the depreciation are added up. The exact math head never once run out loud in your driveway. He moves back in with his parents for what he insists more than once is just a few months. The lease penalty on the apartment eats almost the entire severance by itself. None of this is a moral failing. It's an arithmetic one, set in motion months before the layoff email existed as anything more than a line item in a spreadsheet 3 states away. The storm didn't create the vulnerability. It only revealed it, the way a hard rain reveals which roof was never actually sealed. You lend him a hand where you can, a reference for the next job, an evening spent helping him rewrite a resume that had gone stale. But you don't lend him money, and you don't offer to. Not because you couldn't, because the truck taught its lesson at exactly the price it needed to teach it, and any check you wrote now would only refund the tuition before the course was finished. There's a woman 2 cubicles down from where Trevor used to sit. Her name is Priya. She has worked in the claims department for 11 years, drives a Corolla with a dent in the rear bumper she's never bothered to fix, and wears the same 3 cardigans in a rotation regular enough that people joke about it good-naturedly near the coffee machine. She also wears a watch that, if you looked closely enough to know what you were actually looking at, costs more than Trevor's truck did before tax and fees. You ask her about it once, carefully, the way you ask about anything that doesn't match the room it's standing in. She tells you she bought it the year she finished paying off her mortgage, in cash, both the house 11 years earlier and, eventually, the watch. Not to announce anything to the department. She wears long sleeves for half the year anyway, and most people who've worked beside her for a decade have never once looked closely enough to notice it. It wasn't a reward to show anyone. It was a private receipt for something nobody in that building would ever get to see the paperwork for, filed away the same quiet way she files everything else. That's habit 5. The willingness to buy something beautiful only after it's already been earned twice. Once in the purchase itself, and once in the years of restraint that made the purchase harmless rather than dangerous. Beautiful things were never the enemy in any of this. Buying them without knowing their true price is. She tells you one more thing, almost as an afterthought, closing her desk drawer on the subject the way she closes it on the watch itself every evening before she leaves. She says the moment the mortgage was gone, the watch stopped being something she wanted and started being something she could finally afford to not want anymore. That the wanting had quietly evaporated the second the debt did, and buying it afterward was less a purchase and more a formality, a paragraph added to a story that had already ended well. You think about that sentence for longer than you expect to. It reframes something you'd never quite put into words before. That desire and debt often arrive dressed as the same feeling, an itch that purchasing seems to solve, and that the only reliable way to tell them apart is to wait until the debt is gone and see whether the itch is still there. For Priya, it wasn't. For Trevor, sitting in a truck he no longer owns, it's hard to know, but the fact that he sold it within a month, that the driveway went quiet again almost as fast as it had gotten loud, suggests the itch was never really about the truck at all. Your phone rings at 2:17 in the morning. It's your sister, your father has fallen, an ambulance is already involved, and there is a specific shake in her voice that only shows up a handful of times across a life, the kind that tells you everything before a single detail does. You book the first flight out. It's $890, one way, the kind of last-minute fare that exists specifically to punish people for having emergencies at inconvenient hours. You do not open your banking app first. You do not do the mental math you would have done 11 years ago, the quiet, involuntary subtraction that used to run in the background of every large decision you made, a second conversation happening underneath the real one. The cost simply doesn't attend the moment. It isn't in the room with you at all. This is habit 6, and it's the only one on this list that isn't really about money at any point. It's about what money was for the entire time, underneath every other habit that came before it. Not the truck, not the watch, not the driveway, not the app you cancelled on a Sunday morning 18 minutes at a time. It was always, from the very first dollar you set aside on purpose, about purchasing its own absence from your mind, so that when your father is on a gurney in a hallway you've never stood in before, your full unmortgaged attention belongs entirely to the people who need it and to nothing else competing for space alongside them. That's the highest job money ever does, and almost nobody markets it that way because it doesn't photograph well and it doesn't fit in a caption. It doesn't buy status. It doesn't buy a truck arriving on a flatbed or 41 strangers agreeing you're blessed. It buys the silence in which everything that actually matters can finally be heard without anything else competing for the same 11 seconds of attention. You land at 6:40 a.m. Your sister is in a waiting room with 2 vending machine coffees, one for her and one, apparently, that Shed bought out of habit before remembering you were still an hour from arriving. Your father is stable. It will be a long few weeks, not a tragedy, just a long few weeks of appointments and follow-ups and a walker he will resist for at least a month before finally giving into it. None of it is cinematic. All of it is the only thing that matters that morning. Somewhere around hour 3 in that waiting room, a nurse asks if you need anything, and your sister, exhausted, half jokes that what she needs is for the parking validation to actually work this time. You laugh, quietly, because it's true and because it's the smallest possible problem in a room full of much larger ones. And because, for once in your life, the smallest problem is the only one you're allowed to think about. There is no invoice arriving later that changes how this week goes. There's no number to check, no rate to worry about, no bill that will decide whether your father gets the second scan the doctor recommends almost as an afterthought. The absence of that calculation is so complete you almost don't notice it happening, which, you realize later, is exactly what it was built to do. You fly home 2 days later, and the tire light is still on. You finally pull into the shop on a Wednesday afternoon on the way back from the hospital's follow-up call. $11, 4 minutes, the same small problem that sat there patiently through a bank visit, a Thursday layoff email, and a 2 a.m. phone call, waiting the entire time for a version of you that finally had a free hour to spend on something that's small. Math never fixes a Monday morning. It never fixed the specific hollowness in Trevor's voice on that call, and it wouldn't have arrived any faster if you'd have told him, that night, the number sitting quietly in your own accounts. The number would have changed nothing about the truck payment already due, the lease already signed, the 10 weeks of severance already fixed in place. Money doesn't undo decisions that were already made. It only decides quietly and years in advance whether the next hard Thursday costs you a system or costs you everything. The habits were never really measuring the money at all. They were measuring how much of your mind the money occupied. The app checking at midnight, the truck payment recalculated every time gas prices moved, the low hum of financial dread that Trevor carries into every ordinary Tuesday, whether or not anything is actually wrong that week. You see him sometimes now, at the mailbox, and he asks how you're doing in the tone of someone who has stopped assuming anyone's doing especially well, because his own definition of doing well got quietly recalibrated somewhere around month 2 back at his parents' house. You tell him you're fine. You are. It isn't a performance either way. That's the part that's easy to miss from the outside. The absence of the show isn't its own kind of show. It's just Tuesday, still, the same as it was in the bank lobby with the tire light on. And now that so little of that space is occupied in you, now that the 18 minutes on a Sunday and the 6 months in something boring and the watch bought only after the mortgage was gone have all quietly done their work, what fills the room where the worry used to?